Buenos días, muchas gracias por venir.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. It's always a pleasure and a joy to be here. Nicolas, once again, thank you for this invitation. Today, I'm going to amuse myself better. I'm not going to talk about innovation or the agency or what I've been talking about in the past few years, but I've come across some technical aspects in this year because we are collaborating with the Ceibal plan in data management. So I started revisiting data management early this year. I found that there were many changes in such an old discipline. We started writing about these topics in the 80s, 90s, but there have been many, many changes, and those changes are mainly marked by many things that can be done on the basis of data that couldn't be done before. We could we can do pattern recognition, AI techniques. We can convert data quite easily, and they work out in intelligence systems. So the question of data has really grown, and there are many people who work magic with data. They develop new things. They do automatic learning, and they show us things that we didn't use, that we didn't see before, patterns. And there are also people who make smoke on the basis of data. That's the issue. When you make magic, when things don't work, the rabbit is not a nice rabbit, but a monster coming out of the hat. And that happens when data are wrong. So to have good data is really, has always been very important. It's always been very important, but for a relatively short time, we started drawing conclusions and making decisions on the basis of products coming from automatic learning. So we lost our intuition, and we don't have that layer of intuition that we had vis-a-vis a Frankenstein or a rabbit with large teeth. We would realize it because our intention would tell us about it. And now we've got problems to understand or recognize those situations, and it's more important to have data well. And that's relatively vague and easy at first look, at first sight. There are people working on this question of data. Data Management Association, DAMA, has been in existence for quite some time. It had a very slow starting. The DAMA book that you show there has its second edition. So this gives you an idea of how slow the whole process is. The second edition has been there for a few years. So we are at a time where it's starting accelerating and starting building new things, particularly a new vision about data management. So the book, the Bible, it's called the Mbok, is already some years old. It's a terribly thick book, like all books trying to include all knowledge in an area at a certain point in time. So it's impossible to be read. At some time, we put it behind us in our library. We would never read them because if we read them, they were full of dust and we would get allergy. Now we've got them in the internet, so no one sees that we have them. You don't even have to have this one in the internet either. But they went into the trouble of making a summary. It's no longer 800 pages long. It's 200 pages long, and it's almost readable. I've read it, and this is what I'm going to tell you about a little bit. It's going to be worthwhile for some of you to read it, and perhaps this brief summary helps you to pinpoint the most important topics. Now, the conceptual step of data management is a bit green. TAM International has to go on working. I think they are walking along the right path. They are working well, but there is still the experience of many of you to be incorporated. You're going to be interacting and focusing on this. The conceptual diagram is this one, the one you can see there on the screen. which is a diagram that you can't certainly understand anything. There are so many things. If we print it out and we put it in our office as a poster, it's not even nice, and you won't even understand anything. So let's forget about this conceptualization level. There is still a long way to go to have clearer elements in this area. However, there are things that are truly important and that we can say that we know about them and that we have to build on top of them. Nicolas, in his talks, has been telling us that software is conquering the world. He's been saying it for a while now in his talks. If we say this about data, is that data are everywhere. They are absolutely everywhere. They are in the old information systems, but they are also in real-time systems, in all monitoring, in all systems that are providing, supplying data, some with an absurd frequency, others too slow, too fast, but they are everywhere. That's a data from reality. It's a fact from reality. The second fact is that data are a capital. They form part of the assets. They are part of the assets of a company, of a corporation, institution. And the third very important issue is that we have to understand that one thing is technology management, something different is data management. I'm going to try and persuade you, some of you will get angry with me, that data management is sufficiently important that we can't leave it in the hands of engineers. IT engineers shouldn't be in charge of data management. This has to be placed somewhere else in the organization. It must have its own relative weight. That should be very important, far more important than at present. We are running too many risks if data control is in the hands of IT people. And many times, IT people haven't been able to develop intuitions or semantic approach. And they are working with a syntactic layer. And whenever they see some results, they don't have the intuition to say whether that result is crazy or not. And we can see that very often. So with this big three, data are everywhere. They form part of the company's asset. Data management and technology management are identified as two different activities. And we're now going to talk specifically about data management. Data management is to execute and develop and carry out plans, policies, programs, and practices that are specific to an organization. As regards regarding data, to protect them, to increase their value, to provide data adequately to your internal or external customers, to control data. That is the core of the vision of data management in an organization. And we can talk about some dimensions. One first dimension has to do with governance. It has to do with strategy, with policies that we are adopting, with the definition or defining the value of the data for the organization. We have to know up to what extent those data are important for the organization as a whole, or it's simply important for a sector of the organization, for an operating part of the organization that perhaps isn't. Of course, it's important, but perhaps it's not that important for the organization as such. We're not making decisions on the basis of those data, but there are operating parts that work on it. So we have to define the value, and that is very important. And also, we have to have a well-prepared organization to understand that value and increase it as much as possible. Governance requires a data committee to be set up at the highest level with participation of the upper management to participate in these talks and make decisions instead of accepting decisions coming from data systems. As it happens in many corporations, we have a data governance that is the inheritance of how the various layers have been accumulated of corporate levels. And And so we have some structures that, in fact, are the way we govern data, but hasn't been planned out, hasn't been thought out. Now, a second division is the question of the life cycle. Again, what's the architecture of data? What are the critical data? What is it that we're going to be including in our business intelligence areas? What data we're going to deliver to our data scientists that we're going to require so that they work magics and recognize patterns, so on and so forth, because these are two very different areas. Business intelligence, the boss, all the tools that perhaps many of you have bumped into, and we've in our corporations have all these dashboards and lights, but not many people look at them. But that's different from research, from creating new knowledge, creating new information, transforming data in information.
Ciertos datos y transformarlos en
Transforming data and making it important from business intelligence. And the other thing is to make and draw conclusions that we didn't used to have. It's to organize new knowledge. So the question of the life cycle is fundamental. Another fundamental aspect come from the need to review our discipline in the 21st century. We're talking about data protection. We're talking about privacy. We have many things on the table that we didn't used to have. We have new problems that result from the fact that we can do many things and that data are an asset. So we have to make sure that we protect data. We have to ensure the quality of data, the privacy, and of course, we have to manage the data about the data, the metadata. Metadata become a fundamental part of this discipline of data management. If we look at a corporation and we look at the various sectors in an organization, if we look at the management, administrative, and financial issues about operations, we're going to find out something that remind me of when I was preparing this talk. It reminded me of the 6 blind wise men, and they came across an elephant, and each one of them related to a part of it. And one of them said he had come across a tree. The other blind wise man said he had a cord or a part of a branch, and depending on the part of the elephant that it related to or he related to. And none of the wise men was able to understand the elephant as such. Something similar happens to a corporation. If you're working at a corporation, management, 100,000 electronic devices, millions of devices among its customers or beneficiaries, perhaps some things like the number of the series of a plaque is important for the technical service because they need traceability in history, but it's not important for the organization as such because the number of the plate of the device is not important. It's important for technical service, but not important for the decision making made and the decision-making process by upper management. But perhaps the MAC number, identifying that device in the global network, that number is going to be linked to the person who holds the device at a certain point in time and is going to be giving us information about how that person is using that device. So it's a very long number with many digits. As horrible as the series number, it is important because it's part of the elephant and not only part of the trunk of the elephant. So we have to make that kind of decision. We have to make those decisions and be aware of it and record it. And that's why we have to manage metadata. Now, this work that I started doing early this year, I had to immerse myself again in this topic because, as I said, it was a pleasure, to go back to these issues after many years where I was doing something different. To come back, of course, with some work to be done, and it was interesting to see how things have changed. in a corporation, we have new topics and new players now. If we have those principles of data, the three ones that I mentioned initially, if we have those dimensions, the dimension of governance, the life cycle, and the other aspects that we also have to take into account, such as privacy and so on and so forth, then we have the question of metadata, and we have the question of how to manage all this, and if there is a standard IT department can do it or not. And the answer is that that standard department isn't able to do it. We have to create an area, of course, that has to be coordinated, that has to be linked to the IT area, but relatively independent of it. And that area is the data management area. That's where, bottom up, we're going to start with the definition of data management and the question of the elephant. What data is important for all the organization? What data is important for a certain area? And then there is someone who appears there working, and he's the curator. He's been working on metadata, and he has to look after the quality of the data so that it arrives in due time and form, so that it's well stored, that it's updated, that all changes are shown therein. And where should the curator be? Should he be working at the IT department or in the operations department? In practice, literature says that data curators should be in operating areas, because data curators are not people who know about technology. They know about business. They know about business. They know how to use their intuition to know if something is doing well or badly, if a delay is certainly a problem, or just something that, well, nothing happens if it takes 2 or 3 days more. So data curator, the strong recommendation that we can make here is that data curator must be in operations area and not in the IT department, and that they have a split area, a split life. Now, to have a split life in a matricial corporation shouldn't be any news. So part of the time of a person is managing metadata while working in operations area. That's the ideal. When it's appraised, it should have a certain percentage in the operations and a small percentage for data management, because they are the ones that will have to be trained and support him and solve problems that the curator finds at a certain point in time. So the curator then is a character, that is a new character. It comes from the operations area with a lot of training in data management, with a lot of training in metadata and management of metadata, and he fulfills that role in the organization. We also have another role, and that's the role of the analyst. The analyst will be held responsible for adequately feeding everything related to business intelligence and making the necessary crisscrossing to transform data into information, to convey them adequately, and to make them available to the various managements in the best way possible. Many times, analysts coincide with the curator. When we talk about roles, we're not talking about different people. We're talking about one same person that may be playing different roles. A third role is this data scientist. Data scientist is not the one that should take information from the data, but it's the one who has to create new information. It's no longer taking data out, but finding correlations, finding patterns, finding new things, finding new knowledge in the organization coming from the data pool that we've got. And researchers are the ones working on specific projects. And then we have the asking type. That's the manager. In all organizations, there is someone asking questions. Sometimes it's a general manager, sometimes it's board members, because we are working all of us, for that upper management. So if we identify those 4 roles, they have to be mapped somewhere, and we have to have an area that manages all this. And so we have a job description. We need someone able to articulate among the various managers, with the researchers, somebody who knows data sources, the skills of analysts and researchers, who knows the requirements and the needs. So we need someone, the data manager should have all these skills. We need a data manager who makes sure that internal clients from the various management know the type of information they can have access to, may wish to have. It happens that in many organizations there is information that is loose somewhere that no one reads and no one looks at it, because no one is making that sales job. You know, I've got data. If they want me, they can. If they want those data, they should come up to me. I don't go around selling my data. I don't have that role of articulator. Once I have the data management manager, I'm going to ask him to sell them, to tell the various managements all the information we've got and that isn't being used or is being underused. In the same way as our data manager must know the internal clients, the different managers, he must know the skills and capacities, but he must submit challenging topics to analysts and researchers. These people know that there is certain job to be done, and if we don't provide them with challenging topics to analyze, they'll get bored and they'll leave us. In the same way as it happens with good software developers, if we don't give him a reasonably challenging topic, if he's not involved in a relatively interesting project, he'll go away. He'll probably not leave you because of money. He'll leave because he wants more challenges. So to know researchers and analysts and to know the problems and do that matching is extremely important. Lastly, data managers must lead exchange between researchers, analysts, and clients. It has to have the big picture. It has to know the data, and it must look after the data quality. He must have the control of the work of curators and the control of training for curators. If we haven't got all that, I mean, all this sounds grand, and of course you have to do it step by step. But if we haven't got all that, we'd run the risk that this magic of those who take the rabbit out of the hat end up by taking a Frankenstein out of the box and not the adequate rabbit. To make data science, to do good business intelligence, to make good frames and pictures, to provide information about adequate management that is updated and truly useful to upper management isn't easy at all. But we can't build magic, which is the tip of the iceberg, if we haven't got all the work that is much heavier work that starts by taking the first data, which probably comes from a small device, and make the decision. I mean, how often do we have to sample it? Every millisecond or just once a day? Or if we don't make the right decision, if that decision comes from the hard work or the first layer of the framework or by someone who designed IT systems, we're not going to have the basis. We're going to have a very small iceberg, because you have a big iceberg to truly have power and development at the top of the organization. To be able to deliver value, we need all the work to be done on data management. To wrap up then, the interesting piece of news here is that data are sufficiently important, sufficiently transcendental. They are part of the asset of an organization. They are everywhere. We can't leave them in the hands of IT, not because the IT people have an ill will, but simply because IT people aren't in the business. They aren't in the operations. They needn't be there either because they are focused on something. Now we have to create an area that has another focus, that has to look after all this situation, because the challenges of all these things are very important, and we can truly come to build new information. We can really build new knowledge on the basis of the data of organization, and we need that new information and new knowledge is consistent, is based on solid ground, is understandable, and is part of that asset, of those assets of the institution or corporation. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.